Louis Armstrong was a New Orleans musician and a transformative cultural figure who became one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. Louis Daniel Armstrong, jazz trumpeter, singer, and entertainer, was born in New Orleans, Louisiana on August 4, 1901. He came from poverty and hardship. He had a distinctive appearance with his famous broad smile and handkerchief. Armstrong's early years were marked by struggle and resilience. He grew up in the poorest section of New Orleans, a neighborhood so rough it was called the battlefield. His childhood shaped his understanding of music and performance, though his later career would transform those lessons into an art form that changed American culture forever. Armstrong's family life was unstable from the beginning. His father, William Armstrong, abandoned the family shortly after Louis was born. His mother, Mary Albert, worked as a domestic servant but struggled with poverty and personal problems. Young Louis was often left in the care of his grandmother, Josephine Armstrong, who provided what stability she could. The boy spent much of his childhood on the streets, hustling for pennies and absorbing the musical culture that surrounded him in New Orleans. New Orleans at the turn of the century was a unique musical environment. The city was a melting pot of cultures: African, French, Spanish, Caribbean, and American, and this diversity created a rich musical tradition. Brass bands played at funerals and parades. Ragtime piano filled the saloons. Blues singers performed on street corners. Young Louis absorbed all of it, developing an ear for melody and rhythm that would serve him throughout his life. Armstrong's first encounter with the law came on New Year's Eve, 1912, when he was 11 years old. He fired his stepfather's pistol into the air in celebration and was promptly arrested. He was sent to the Colored Waifs Home for Boys, an institution that would change his life. At the Waifs Home, Armstrong received his first formal musical instruction. Peter Davis, the home's music teacher, recognized the boy's talent and gave him a cornet. Armstrong took to the instrument immediately, practicing obsessively and quickly becoming the leader of the home's brass band. After his release from the Waifs Home in 1914, Armstrong returned to the streets of New Orleans, but now with a purpose. He began working odd jobs during the day and playing cornet at night in the honky-tonks and dance halls of the city's red light district, known as Storyville. He studied with the great cornet player Joe King Oliver, who became his mentor and father figure. Oliver taught Armstrong technique and stage presence, lessons that would prove invaluable. Armstrong's talent developed rapidly during his teenage years. He played in various bands around New Orleans, including Kid Oris Band, one of the most popular in the city. His powerful tone and inventive improvisations began to attract attention. In 1918, he married Daisy Parker, a prostitute from the district. The marriage was troubled from the start, marked by violence and instability. It would end in divorce, the first of Armstrong's 4 marriages. In 1919, Armstrong got his big break when he joined the band on a Mississippi riverboat operated by Fate Marable. Playing on the riverboats exposed Armstrong to new audiences and musical styles. He learned to read music better and developed his ability to play in different keys and tempos. The riverboat gigs were demanding, requiring musicians to play for hours every night, but they were excellent training for a young musician trying to master his craft. In 1922, King Oliver, who had moved to Chicago, sent for Armstrong to join his Creole Jazz Band as second cornet. Armstrong left New Orleans for Chicago, never to live in his hometown again. Chicago in the 1920s was the center of the jazz world. The Great Migration had brought thousands of African Americans north, and with them came their music. Jazz clubs filled the South Side, and musicians competed to outplay each other in cutting contests that lasted until dawn. Playing second cornet to his mentor in Oliver's band, Armstrong learned discipline and ensemble playing. The Creole Jazz Band was one of the hottest groups in Chicago, and in 1923 they made their first recordings. These recordings, primitive by later standards, captured Armstrong's playing for the first time. Even as second cornet, his power and inventiveness were evident. He was developing a style that emphasized melody and emotional expression over the collective improvisation that characterized early jazz. In 1924, Armstrong married Lil Hardin, the pianist in Oliver's band. Lil was educated and ambitious, and she pushed Louis to leave Oliver's band and strike out on his own. She recognized that her husband's talent was being constrained by his role as second cornet. That same year, Armstrong accepted an offer to join Fletcher Henderson's orchestra in New York City, the most prestigious African-American band in the country. Armstrong's year with Henderson's orchestra was transformative. Henderson's band played sophisticated arrangements for dancers at the Roseland Ballroom. Armstrong's hot, blues-inflected solos contrasted with the band's smoother style, but they electrified audiences and influenced the other musicians. Armstrong was teaching New York musicians a new way to play jazz, emphasizing swing rhythm and individual expression. His solos with Henderson showed a level of technical mastery and creative imagination that no other jazz musician had yet achieved. In 1925, Armstrong returned to Chicago and began making a series of recordings that would revolutionize jazz. These recordings, made with small groups called the Hot Five and later the Hot Seven, were not made for dancing but for listening. They showcased Armstrong's virtuosity and creativity in ways that big band arrangements could not. Songs like West End Blues, Potato Head Blues, and Heebie-Jeebies demonstrated Armstrong's technical command of his instrument and his ability to construct solos that were coherent musical statements, not just strings of impressive phrases. The Hot Five recordings also featured Armstrong singing, which would become as influential as his trumpet playing. On Heebie-Jeebies, Armstrong supposedly dropped the lyric sheet and improvised nonsense syllables, inventing scat singing. Whether this story is true or not, Armstrong's scat singing became a crucial part of his style. His gravelly voice, so distinctive and expressive, treated the human voice as another instrument, capable of the same improvisational freedom as his trumpet. During the late 1920s, Armstrong's style continued to evolve. He switched from cornet to trumpet, which had a brighter, more penetrating sound. His technique became increasingly sophisticated. He could play faster, higher, and with more endurance than any other trumpeter. But technique was never an end in itself for Armstrong. He used his virtuosity to serve the music, to create solos that told stories and expressed emotions. His playing had a narrative quality, a sense of building tension and release that made each solo a complete musical journey. Armstrong's success brought him wealth and fame. He moved from small clubs to large theaters. He began leading big bands rather than small groups. In 1929, he appeared on Broadway in the musical Hot Chocolates, performing Fats Waller's Ain't Misbehavin', which became one of his signature songs. He was becoming more than a jazz musician. He was becoming an entertainer, a star who appealed to both black and white audiences at a time when America was rigidly segregated. The 1930s saw Armstrong's career reach new heights. He toured extensively, performing in Europe for the first time in 1932. European audiences and critics embraced him enthusiastically, treating jazz as serious art rather than mere entertainment. Armstrong was celebrated in Paris and London, meeting with royalty and cultural figures. These European tours validated jazz as an art form and established Armstrong as its greatest practitioner. However, Armstrong's success came with compromises that would later prove controversial. To reach white audiences, he adopted a stage persona that emphasized entertainment over artistry. He mugged and grinned, he told jokes in exaggerated dialect, he played to stereotypes of the happy, simple Negro that white audiences found comfortable. This performing style made him wealthy and famous, but it also drew criticism from younger African Americans who saw his stage persona as demeaning and subservient. Armstrong's personal life during this period was complicated. His marriage to Lil Hardin ended in divorce in 1938. He had already begun a relationship with Alpha Smith, whom he married in 1938, but that marriage also ended quickly. In 1942, Armstrong married Lucille Wilson, a dancer at the Cotton Club. This marriage lasted until his death, providing him with the stable home life he had never known as a child. Lucille was devoted to Louis, managing their home and supporting his career while maintaining her own dignity and independence. During World War II, Armstrong continued to perform and record. He appeared in films, usually in small roles that showcased his musical talent but rarely gave him opportunities for dramatic acting. Hollywood, like the rest of America, had limited roles for African American performers. Armstrong appeared in Pennies from Heaven with Bing Crosby, Cabin in the Sky, and many other films, always playing musicians or servants, never leading men. In 1947, Armstrong made a crucial decision about his career. He disbanded his big band and returned to playing with a small group, the All-Stars. This sextet format allowed Armstrong to stretch out on his solos and interact with other musicians in ways that big band arrangements did not permit. The All-Stars included some of the finest jazz musicians of the era, and their performances recaptured some of the spontaneity and excitement of Armstrong's early recordings. The 1950s brought new challenges and opportunities. Rock and roll was emerging, and traditional jazz was falling out of fashion with young audiences. However, Armstrong remained popular, particularly with older listeners and international audiences. He continued to tour constantly, earning the nickname Ambassador Satch for his role in representing American culture abroad. The State Department sponsored some of these tours, using Armstrong's popularity to promote American democracy during the Cold War. Armstrong's role as cultural ambassador became complicated in 1957 during the Little Rock School integration crisis. When President Eisenhower initially refused to enforce the Supreme Court school desegregation order, Armstrong publicly criticized him, calling the president two-faced and canceling a State Department tour of the Soviet Union. This was a rare moment of political outspokenness from Armstrong, who usually avoided controversy. His statement shocked many white Americans who had seen him as safely apolitical. It also surprised younger African Americans who had dismissed him as an Uncle Tom. The incident revealed the complexity of Armstrong's position. He had succeeded in a racist society by accommodating white expectations, but he had never forgotten the discrimination he had faced or the struggles of his people. He supported civil rights causes financially and spoke out when pushed too far. However, he never became a political activist in the way that younger artists like Max Roach or Charles Mingus did. He believed his music was his contribution to racial progress, and he resented being told his approach was wrong. In 1964, Armstrong achieved his greatest popular success with Hello, Dolly. The title song from the Broadway musical became a #1 hit, knocking the Beatles off the top of the charts. At 63, Armstrong was the oldest person to have a #1 hit. The success of Hello, Dolly introduced Armstrong to a new generation of listeners who knew nothing about his revolutionary recordings of the 1920s. To many young people, he was simply a beloved entertainer with a gravelly voice and a warm smile. Armstrong's health began to decline in the late 1960s. Years of constant touring and performing had taken their toll. He suffered heart and kidney problems but continued to perform whenever possible. In 1968, he had a major hit with What a Wonderful World, a song that became his final signature tune. The song's optimistic message and Armstrong's heartfelt delivery made it an anthem of hope during troubled times. Armstrong's final years were marked by increasing health problems and decreasing ability to play his trumpet. The embouchure muscles that controlled his playing had been damaged by decades of high-note playing and long performances. He could no longer play with the power and range that had defined his style. Yet he continued to perform, relying more on his singing and his presence than his trumpet playing. On July 6, 1971, Louis Armstrong died in his sleep at his home in Corona, Queens, New York. He was 69 years old. The cause of death was heart failure, the culmination of years of declining health. Armstrong's funeral was attended by thousands, including musicians, politicians, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by his music. He was mourned around the world as one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. Armstrong's legacy is immense and multifaceted. As a musician, he virtually invented the jazz solo, transforming jazz from a collective folk music into an art form that showcased individual expression and virtuosity. His technical innovations, his use of swing rhythm, his melodic inventiveness, and his emotional expressiveness established the vocabulary that jazz musicians still use today. Every jazz musician who came after Armstrong was influenced by him, whether they acknowledged it or not. As a singer, Armstrong was equally influential. His gravelly voice and his rhythmic flexibility showed that singing could be as improvisational and expressive as instrumental playing. Frank Sinatra, Billie Holiday, Bing Crosby, and countless other singers learned from Armstrong's approach to phrasing and interpretation. He demonstrated that a distinctive, even unconventional voice could be more expressive than technical perfection. As a cultural figure, Armstrong's legacy is more complicated. His success in reaching white audiences helped establish jazz as America's classical music and opened doors for African American performers. However, his accommodating stage persona and his reluctance to engage in political activism drew criticism from younger, more militant African Americans during the civil rights era. They saw his grinning, handkerchief-waving stage presence as perpetuating racist stereotypes. Modern scholars have been more sympathetic to Armstrong's choices, recognizing the constraints he faced in a segregated society. They note that his success itself was a form of resistance, that his artistry demanded respect even from racist audiences, and that his occasional political statements carried weight precisely because they were so rare. They acknowledge that Armstrong navigated a racist entertainment industry with dignity and achieved success on his own terms. Armstrong's influence extends far beyond jazz. He was one of the first African American entertainers to achieve genuine crossover success, appealing to audiences of all races. He demonstrated that African American culture could be both commercially successful and artistically significant. He was a pioneer who made it possible for later generations of black artists to succeed in mainstream American culture. Perhaps Armstrong's greatest achievement was his ability to communicate joy through his music. Despite a childhood of poverty and hardship, despite facing racism throughout his life, despite personal disappointments and professional setbacks, Armstrong's music radiated happiness and optimism. His smile was genuine, his laughter infectious, his music life-affirming. He believed in the power of music to bring people together and to make life better. In the end, Louis Armstrong was more than a great musician. He was a cultural force who changed American music and American culture. His innovations as a trumpeter and singer established the foundation for modern jazz. His success as an entertainer helped break down racial barriers. His music brought joy to millions of people around the world. He rose from the most desperate poverty to international fame, and he never forgot where he came from or lost his humanity in the process. Armstrong represents a particular type of artist, the natural genius whose innovations seem effortless but whose impact is profound and lasting. His music sounds simple and direct, but it revolutionized an art form. His stage presence seemed guileless and spontaneous, but it was carefully crafted to communicate with audiences. His life appeared to be a straightforward success story, but it involved difficult choices and painful compromises. Armstrong was, in death as in life, a man of contradictions, remembered for his joyful music and his broad smile, but also for the complexity of his position as an African American artist in a racist society. His legacy includes both the revolutionary Hot 5 recordings and the crowd-pleasing performances of Hello, Dolly. He was both a serious artist and a popular entertainer, both a racial pioneer and a controversial figure within the African American community. He was, quite simply, one of the most important American artists of any era, and his music continues to inspire and delight listeners nearly a century after his first recordings.